Hello everyone and welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to be doing an update on my Microsoft thesis, and specifically we're going to be doing a breakdown of Microsoft's AI CapEx, which has been ballooning in the recent past and has many investors concerned. I not only solve that concern, which I believe there's a lot to be learned on that part of the video alone, but I think this video will also give you insight into whether we really are in an AI bubble. Is the technology useful or not? Is it driving value for companies really or not? And I think that the last earnings call for Microsoft, which is Q4 fiscal year 2024, has a vast treasure trove of information that I think people are overlooking. So let's dig deep into it. As I was saying, the primary concern now with Microsoft on the market's behalf is the exorbitant AI CapEx, and whether it will make sense long-term or not. In the last quarterly report, CapEx came in at $19 billion, which accounted for just over 29% of revenue this quarter. In the call, management explained that CapEx was addressed towards AI and cloud initiatives, with half of the spend going to infrastructure and the other half essentially going to CPUs and GPUs. As I said, digging deep into the call, I found a series of abstractions which I think will be very valuable not only for Microsoft shareholders but for anyone that participates in the market really. And before we get into that, one thing that really caught my attention is how Satya Nadella mentioned both AMD and Nvidia in terms of sourcing compute engines and so forth, roughly giving each the same level of importance. Here's what he said.
We added new AI accelerators from AMD and Nvidia, as well as our own first-party silicon Azure Maya. And we introduced new Cobalt 100, which provides best-in-class performance for customers like Elastic, MongoDB, Siemens, Snowflake, and Teradata.
As you may know, one of my largest positions, I only have 5, is AMD, and I believe that AMD will take market share from Nvidia in the AI accelerator space. It's true that over time I'm seeing AMD lean into the inference side of things when Nvidia is actually more focused on training, and it does seem to me like the market will grow exponentially over the next decade. My thesis therefore does not imply that as a result Nvidia will falter, but rather that the market is underpricing AMD's, I think, future leading role in the AI market, and I think the market is being very conservative on that stock. In my last Meta update, I also outlined how Llama 3.1, so Meta's latest AI model, is now running on AMD's MI300 chip exclusively for live traffic. So in short, I see AMD's AI accelerators taking market share, gaining meaningful traction, and meanwhile, the stock is down approximately 23% from all-time highs. Going back to the CapEx concern, Microsoft management seems to be thinking about CapEx in exactly the same way as Meta management, and I covered that 2 posts ago when I dropped my latest Meta update. So what Microsoft has been up to is they've been architecting a highly flexible and fungible data center architecture. That allows them to instantiate data centers and then hydrate components within the data centers as they see demand signals coming along. By hydrate, I mean they just activate them, deploy them, etc. within the data center. So the way Microsoft operates is they deploy the base infrastructure, so the building, the land, everything, and then they deploy more AI compute as they see people demanding more AI. It's very simple. During the call, I learned that Microsoft intends to be amortizing these data centers over a 15-year long period. And so the long duration coupled with the aforementioned flexibility and fungibility, I think in theory gives them the capacity to deploy this capital efficiently. Here's what Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said about this during the call.
The asset, as Amy said, is a long-term asset, which is land and the data center, which, by the way, we don't even construct things fully. We can even have things which are semi-constructed, we call cold shells and so on. So we know how to manage our CapEx spend to build out a long-term asset, and a lot of the hydration of the kit happens when we have the demand signal.
And CFO Amy Hood followed up on Satya's remarks with some very insightful information, which I think will give you a complete picture, together with my analysis.
Being able to maybe share a little more about that, when we talked about roughly half of FY24's total capital expense, as well as half of Q4's expense, it's really on land and builds and finance leases, and those things really will be monetized over 15 years and beyond. And they're incredibly flexible. Because we've built a consistent architecture, first with a commercial cloud, and second with the Azure Stack for AI, regardless of whether the demand's at the platform layer or at the app layer or through third parties and partners, or frankly, our first-party SaaS, it uses the same infrastructure. So we've got long-lived, flexible assets.
Satya made particular emphasis on Microsoft closely monitoring AI demand signals and thus, as I was explaining, deploying incremental CapEx towards AI as they see more people use AI essentially. Getting down to the specifics, in the call I saw some interesting data signals which I believe are representative of an underlying shift. Microsoft's productivity tools are enabling more productivity gains with AI. That's my takeaway from these signals. Hopefully you will take away the same, but let me know in the comments what you think about this data. At the moment, across the entire Microsoft product and service suite, the impact of AI is most visible in GitHub. GitHub is a platform that Microsoft acquired in 2018, and it basically allows people to upload, share code, etc. So it's kind of where developers live in the digital space, and it's where people go to code up projects and collaborate with other people and stuff. As of Q4 fiscal year 2024, so this last quarter that I'm covering, GitHub CoPilot, the AI service that enables developers to essentially automate code production and gradually automate more and more parts of the code production development deployment lifecycle, has been adopted by over 77,000 customers, organizations to date. Copilot accounted for 70% of GitHub's revenue growth year over year, and the revenue from GitHub Copilot is now greater than GitHub's total revenue when Microsoft acquired it back in October 2018. So my view is that GitHub is a relatively small corner of the Microsoft productivity ecosystem, and thus this signal is not absolute, but the underlying Copilot mechanics are fundamentally just as applicable to the rest of Microsoft's productivity tools. In highly simplified terms, all Copilot does is pick up data on user activity and thus learn to automate tasks that are performed repeatedly by users in varying contexts. Thus, I don't see why the outperformance in GitHub won't translate equally in time to the other components of Microsoft's productivity surfaces. Coincidentally, management said during the call that they are seeing signals that point to Office tools heading in the same direction as GitHub. And as you may know, and I cover this in depth in the original Microsoft deep dive, which I linked to in the written form of the deep dive, Microsoft makes a large part of its money with these whole productivity offerings. And so this is interesting. I think GitHub is growing very fast. I think that the same mechanics that are working for GitHub will work for the rest of their offerings, and likely they'll resume much faster growth than even in their best days. Here's what Satya said about this in the Q2 call.
So to me, look, at the end of the day, Gen AI is just software. So it is really translating into fundamentally growth on what has been our M365 SaaS offering with a new offering that is the Copilot SaaS offering, which today is on a growth rate that's faster than any other previous generation of software we launched as a suite in M365. That's, I think, the best way to describe it. I mean, and the numbers I think we shared even this quarter are indicative of this, Mark. So if you look at it, we have both the landing of the seats itself quarter over quarter that is growing 60%, right? That's a pretty good, healthy sign.
I express a similar view regarding AI to Satya's in the piece in which I explain why I think Palantir will be bigger than Tesla. To lay the groundwork for the abstraction that makes me believe so, I explain why absolute compute will continue growing exponentially in the world with or without AI. This is very well evidenced by the graph that you see on the screen now, which was first shared by futurist Ray Kurzweil. On the y-axis, you have compute per second per constant dollar, and so inflation adjusted and stuff. And then on the x-axis, you have the year. And so you can see how that plots a straight line. This is actually logarithmic scale, right? So here what you're seeing is exponential growth in compute per second per constant dollar over time. And so this graph suggests that since the 1930s, humanity has found a way to exponentiate compute per dollar for decades, and that whether the current format of AI lives up to its hype or not, the demand for compute will likely be exponentially higher going forward. Indeed, my view is that investors get confused about AI because they see it as a mysterious entity that's somehow detached from this pseudo-universal law that I just showed you in the graph. On the contrary, and I like to see this, Microsoft management correctly sees it as just another piece of software that simply requires much more compute power and happens to increase productivity more than previous software. That Microsoft will require exponentially more compute a decade from now than the current levels of compute, to me is nearly really a certainty unless we have something very bad happen to the world, like a major war, whatever, and then the world goes back to the medieval ages. Hence, the build out of data centers is justified if they are designed to be amortized over a sufficiently long period of time. Because even if the current version of AI doesn't pick up, we're still going to need a lot more compute power. And so these data centers, if long duration, as explained, and highly flexible and fungible, you're just going to be able to put into these data centers whatever compute engine you may need for the software in question to be run well. So within that context, it's perfectly natural that the rate at which they hydrate new compute engines depends on the demand signal. As always, this has always been the case. It's just that now we're going through a period of time in history in which the demand for compute is accelerating a bit more. Indeed, we could be getting ahead of ourselves, but my view is that that graph tells you basically everything that you need to know about compute. We're just producing much more of it. We need much more of it. These data centers are likely to make sense in terms of return on capital invested if they are well managed, which in my view is a function of the culture. I've explained this many times. I don't see any signs of cultural degradation in Microsoft, so I think it's going to turn out all right. Additionally, Microsoft is ideally positioned to understand what types of compute customers across the world are demanding, as is the case with the other hyperscalers. Within Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud service, or the equivalent to Amazon's AWS, for example, Microsoft has an offering called Azure AI, which is a collection of artificial intelligence services and tools that enable businesses to build, deploy, and manage AI models in the wild at scale. Other hyperscalers do have similar offerings, as I've covered in my recent Meta and Amazon updates, but the point is, this gives Microsoft and other hyperscalers a real-time view of exactly what businesses are demanding in terms of compute and whether AI is real or not. What are they using it for? What are the outcomes, etc.? Are they coming back for more? Is the demand going up or down over time? By how much? What's the rate of growth, etc.? In Q4 fiscal year 2024, Azure AI customers came in at 60,000, which is up over 60% year over year. Within Azure AI, the number of paid models as a service customers has more than doubled quarter over quarter, according to management. So this is part of the data they are seeing beyond GitHub, which makes them think that AI is real and that they have to build out data centers. But here's the component of asymmetry that I was discussing. These signals can be real or not, but it doesn't really matter because long term we're going to need a lot more computation. My overall view is therefore that hyperscalers are currently unlikely to waste data center capex because the demand for compute is going up big time with or without AI. And as I've been covering in the rest of my updates, AI is driving real business value. You just have to get deep into the quarterly conference call transcripts and see the numbers. I saw Meta doing well with AI, engagement going up notably, especially as they deployed new model architectures which made their recommendation engines more efficient. I see these guys now with GitHub growing fast, and then all the qualitative signals they're seeing with Office 365, etc. And so I think that it's unlikely that hyperscalers are going to do badly going forward. If anything, I think that as they continue to gain scale and the world continues to progressively digitize, I think they're going to be making more and more money because their moat is going to be stronger, because they're going to be hitting higher economies of scale. Hopefully, if these companies remain to be well managed, sharing economies of scale with customers and so forth. And so I think that this is going to make the moat stronger. The other thing that caught my eye in the Q4 fiscal year 2024 report is that Microsoft is now aiming to yield movies and shows out of its gaming IP, intellectual property. You may remember that in my original Netflix deep dive written in March 2023, I explained how Netflix could exponentiate its ARPU, average revenue per user, going forward by non-linearly increasing the surface area of its IP, essentially by creating games out of its shows and movies. I actually figured this out by when I was doing this deep dive, studying Disney's history, and I saw that that's how they started to make real money. For them, the way they had of increasing their surface area non-linearly was the parks. That's what enabled them to start making money. And since then, my view of entertainment companies is just this. It's IP and then surface area. That's how you get money. If you're a Netflix user, you'll know that Netflix is very much executing on this front. If you leave your screen idle for some time, they'll start advertising their game offerings and stuff. And although the business is still very small, as of the last quarterly report, I think that they're going to do very, very well over the next decade with this endeavor. The reason I'm highlighting this is that I think it will be interesting to track Microsoft's progress in terms of making shows and movies out of games, since it will likely yield additional valuable lessons that will be pertinent to the Netflix case. And if you've been consuming my content for some time, you'll know that this was a very insightful one, because people capitulated on Netflix just over a year ago, only for the stock to then bounce back up to all-time highs and so forth. So there's a lot to be learned. I do recommend that you go and check out my original deep deep dive, you will learn a lot from it. Folks are rather worried. I think that we might be in another 1999-like kind of scenario, but across the board, I see the big tech companies paying close attention to whether AI is driving value for them or not, and then intending to play this technology in a rather asymmetric way. This is definitely the case of the hyperscalers, including Microsoft, as I was explaining. In my last meta update, I highlight how AI is driving major engagement increments across the board, as I explained, across its network. And in Microsoft's case, it's obvious to me that copilots are going to make the company's existing and future productivity offerings much more effective than at present. Since the additional productivity gains currently stem from a unified hardware and software stack from which Microsoft is serving both their cloud and end application consumers, I believe that Microsoft is likely to see enhanced margins over time as they continue to deploy more AI capacity, because they do have a pseudo monopoly in terms of productivity tools, and their productivity going forward is going to be very much determined by how much data these productivity tools can harvest in order for AI models to then be trained and therefore automate work for the end customers. And so I think that moat is going up. I do have some second level considerations in this regard. I've explained in the past how digital twins are becoming the epicenter of companies' operations, their most valuable asset, and by extension, I think they're going to become the epicenter of capitalism. And so in the future, I think if you don't have a digital twin, and you can refer to my original Palantir deep dive for that, you're just not going to be able to automate processes to the extent that you should to be competitive. And so when I look at offerings like that of Microsoft, so Excel, Word, etc., I think that these are going to be more relevant in the future than they are today because of this mechanism that I'm explaining about how you can pick up data with them and then train AI models to automate work. But I believe that their relevance in the enterprise is going to be subjected to digital twins. So digital twins are going to take over as the most important productivity offering. And if these offerings are not connected to digital twins, they just won't work as well. So although I believe that these applications are going to be more useful for Microsoft, I am concerned long term that essentially Palantir may disrupt this company. Perhaps not a full disruption, but definitely, as I've explained in the past, Palantir will be in a position to create its own ecosystem of solutions, and it's going to basically just subjugate Microsoft's offerings. So if you're interested about this topic, I wrote about it recently. You'll be able to find the video here on YouTube or Spotify. Check it out on my blog. I do post about this regularly on X. This abstraction is not only relevant for Palantir investors. On the optimistic side, I think it's also valuable if you're a Microsoft shareholder, because I think that this dynamic is going to be very relevant and it's going to come into play big time. Please let me know what you think about that if you're a Microsoft shareholder. Thank you very much for joining me today again. If you enjoyed this, as always, can I please ask you one favor? Can you please share this with one friend whom you think will enjoy it? These deep dives are for free, and so the only way this grows is with your help. Thank you very much. Take care, and until next time.